This is Autoline This Week, the show that gets you inside the global automotive industry. Autoline This Week partnered with the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit to produce this episode. And now, here is your host, John McElroy.
Thanks for joining us on Autoline This Week. Today, we're going to be talking about the Chinese automotive industry because there's a lot of change going on there, both good and bad. And the reason we're going to be talking about that, because my special guest today is Michael Dunne with ZoZo Go, who I happen to believe is the foremost authority on the Chinese automotive industry. And hello there, Mike.
Hey, John. Great to be with you today.
Great to have you on the show. And also joining us for today's show are Eric Lawrence from the Detroit Free Press and Jamie Butters from Automotive News. And welcome aboard, Eric and Jamie.
Hi. Good to be here.
Well, Mike, let's get into it. Boy, U.S.-China relations going from bad to worse. What do you think is going to happen here? And especially, how is this going to impact the automotive industry?
Going from bad to worse is right, John. It's like we're on the speedway. There's no end in sight to the deterioration relationship. I'm reminded of a Chinese expression. It's called sleeping in the same bed, dreaming different dreams. And this has really encapsulated the relationship between the United States and China for the last 40 years. The US wanted the market. Chinese, for their part, they wanted the technology. And as long as the market was growing and the partners were making money, those partners kept sleeping together in the same bed, dreaming their parallel dreams. But now that the market's slowed, and now that China's gotten more ambitious about getting its own technology and leading the world in technologies, things are unraveling, falling apart. That's where we are right now today.
So, Mike, how does the presidential election play into this? We know Trump and Xi kind of had a good relationship at first, and then we've had the trade war. I mean, how are the Chinese looking at the U.S. presidential election, and what might that mean for the auto industry?
The Chinese are somewhat hopeful that the presidential election will spell a new era, a return to the good old days, but I wouldn't bank on it. If you talk to people in Washington, D.C. today, both sides of the aisle, they agree on one thing, and that is that China is a challenge, China is a competitor, China is a rival. And so we should not anticipate any major change for the better in U.S.-China relations after the election, no matter who wins.
Do you think that the issues with TikTok and I believe it was WeChat announced in the last day or so, how much of an impact would that have translating into like auto related issues?
Well, it is a tech industry. And as background, China said in 2014, they laid out this blueprint for global supremacy in next generation technologies, from 5G to electrics to autonomous. They want to own the world in all aspects of technology. WeChat and TikTok look seemingly harmless on the surface, but keep in mind, everything that's recorded on TikTok and WeChat goes back to China and can be viewed by the Communist Party. So this is sort of the tip of the iceberg. It goes deep and wide. And there's no question that the Detroit Three will also come under increasing pressure as China says, "Ooh, US is taking us on. Are they really our friends?" And we've already seen that come out in the numbers.
In what way did you see it come out in the numbers?
Yeah, John, if you look at the numbers, 2017 was a peak for the Detroit Three in China. That year, they sold over 5 million cars. Today, the volumes will be down to about half of that. Ford and FCA are losing money. GM used to count on China as a profit machine. Profits are half what they used to be. The decline is dramatic, and it's very hard to identify a smoking gun like, oh, they're out to get the Detroit Three. But if you look at the performance over the last 3 years, as political tensions have accelerated or been exacerbated, the fortunes of the Detroit Three in China have just been going down and down and down.
But don't you think a lot of that problem is with the Detroit Three themselves? I mean, they sort of took China for granted. Growth was so fantastic. They didn't keep refreshing their model lines as they should. In some cases, they misread what the market wants. GM putting 3-cylinder engines in some of its compact cars that clearly Chinese consumers are not that interested in. Seems to me as much blame could be laid at the feet of GM, Ford, and FCA as at the hands of the Chinese consumer.
You're right. They were spoiled by years of phenomenal growth and profits, and they did get distracted. They took their eyes off the ball. That's a good point. That's a fair point. And a bigger point is if you look around Asia, when markets get competitive, whether it's Japan or Southeast Asia or India, the American brands seem to not be able to hold their own against the Japanese and the Germans. And now in a more competitive Chinese market where sales are down year on year, we're seeing the same pattern emerge. The Germans are doing well, the Japanese are doing well. The Americans are sort of caught in a no man's land with a better, much improved Chinese coming up from the bottom, and then the Japanese and the Germans on top. And the US, where do we go with our brands, with our products?
Well,
big question mark.
It's also, though, the question of how you define American brands, right? As you said, the Detroit Three have been struggling, but Tesla is doing great. They got the right to own their factory outright. They've gotten a lot of support, and Elon Musk has been raving about China's entrepreneurial culture. He feels like, you know, Silicon Valley's gotten fat, dumb, and happy already, and China is where it's at. I mean, certainly they've been good to him. It's do you think, is there a strategic reason? Is it political against Detroit, or is it just the preference for EVs that don't make Shanghai and Beijing even more horribly polluted than they already are?
You know what, Jamie? China's set out to be the global dominator in future electric vehicles. The production base, the R&D base, they already have the biggest battery maker. Tesla plays into that master plan. Bring Tesla in, bring Tesla supply base in, and yes, we'll let them own 100%. But the Chinese also have an expression. Think of the Chinese economy as a bird cage. The Communist Party is in charge of keeping the birds inside the cage. You can fly around as much as you want. You're free to fly around inside that bird cage and do what you like. But ultimately, everything rolls up to the Communist Party. And that's where Tesla finds itself. It's gotten off to a great start, 50,000 sales in the first half, on track for 100,000 for this entire year. But keep in mind, ultimately, Tesla is beholden to the good graces of the Chinese government, the Chinese Communist Party. That's what's going on.
Thanks.
How well do you view the PSA group and then its future partner? How well do you see them doing in China?
PSA, FCA together in China have had a really tough time. PSA sales peaked 5 years ago at 500,000 units. This year, they're on track for about 50,000, if you can believe it. Just a devastating fall. FCA, similar story. So when you put those two companies together in China, it's not adding up to something more powerful. It's two weak players, and hopefully they can find a way. But there's no evidence that either one has momentum in the market right now.
How is it that the Jeep doesn't do more for FCA?
That's a great question. I mean, people in Auburn Hills must be just kicking themselves because they find themselves in the largest SUV market in the world, and with consumers who love brands, who love the Jeep brand. In fact, they think it's, they know it has a global allure. Chinese people who have studied here and worked here see how well Jeep does in North America, and yet they cannot get traction with the consumer back in China. Why not? Well, there's lots of reasons, of course, but the biggest single reason is that when Jeep came to market, they thought, we'll go bottom up. We'll go low price and gradually up the ladder to our better and better products. That was a strategic misstep in my view. They could have started up on the high end where the German SUVs do very well and then come down. So now that they've started at the bottom and it didn't work, how do you turn that around and go back up top? That's what they're wrestling with right now.
Mike, in your latest newsletter, ZoZo Go, which I read every time, it's really well written and it's got great information in it. You had a fascinating point that Chinese EV startups are coming to the United States to raise money. I think you had Li Auto and Candy Technologies and Xpeng have all done IPOs in the United States on American exchanges. And yet, I think you said 75% of the investors are coming from China. Why do that? Why come to the U.S.? Can they not raise that kind of money in China?
That's right. The idea coming to the U.S. is it's a little bit easier to list in New York than it is in Hong Kong or Shanghai, and they want to play on the Tesla momentum. So the Xpunks, that's really a company to watch, and Li Autos see, oh, we can get listed relatively easily on the U.S. exchange, and we're not subject to the same kind of fiduciary responsibilities that we are in other markets. So let's list there, get our money there. And oh, by the way, we have a great story. We're the next Tesla. Don't miss. You have that fear of missing out. Don't miss out. We're the next Tesla. Put your bets down now. And so far it's worked. Li Auto raised over $1 billion. This is a company that's barely 5 years old, has sold less than 10,000 cumulative total units in its history. And yet it just raked in $1 billion on the New York Stock Exchange.
Wow. We talked a little about the trade issues earlier, but let's look at the suppliers if we can. There's obviously it's been a huge market for suppliers and a huge export market, but that's kind of evolving. You helped talk with us for a story about it, but we're seeing a lot of companies, of course, North American producers, automakers with plants here, trying to have maybe a shorter and more secure supply network. But you're saying even some of the Chinese companies are trying to move some of their chains out of China.
That's right. What we're seeing, okay, so let's keep in mind, China is still the biggest car market in the world and will not go away. So much of the supply that's in place in China is not going to move out abruptly. It'll stay there to service the local market, the Chinese market. But increasingly, we're hearing of suppliers taking a second look, saying, we put all of our eggs in the China basket. That was a strategic mistake. We need to pair off some of those resources and some of those future investments and put them into other promising markets, including Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines, Vietnam, India, and closer to home, Mexico. That is a trend that's just taking hold now. Of course, you can't upend supply chains overnight, but look for that trend to take hold with increasing momentum in the coming years. If for no other reason than because US companies in particular will know that they're vulnerable to the whims of the Chinese government. And COVID-19 has brought that to light. It's time to make an adjustment, and that's what's happening.
On the COVID point, what's the situation like recently in the last couple of weeks there?
I was just on the phone last night with my colleagues in China, and it's almost as if it's a different planet. They're operating almost as normal. People are not wearing masks anymore. There's travel. The production side of the business has recovered tremendously. We're basically back to full production in China. The issue is that COVID definitely put a dent into the Chinese economy, lots of job losses. Export businesses that were shipping billions of dollars to the United States and Europe have come down a lot off of their highs. So you have a demand issue, and that's what people are worried about inside China. When will consumer demand return? Everybody's watching that.
Mike, as you noted, speaking of consumer demand, the Chinese government reduced its incentives for new energy vehicles, as they call them, battery electrics and plug-in hybrids. Sales dropped like a rock the instant that they did that. And I think you're the first one that pointed out that the Chinese government is saying, hey, we're not going to subsidize this. You automakers are going to subsidize this. But with the drop in sales, it looks maybe like it's leveling out a little bit right now, maybe. But where do you think this is going to go, especially vis-a-vis subsidies for those cars?
One way or another, John, the Chinese government is committed to making EVs a success in China, whatever it takes. So just as you said, initially, they subsidized the hell out of the industry with hundreds of billions of dollars of direct and indirect subsidies. That got expensive, and they said, we can't do that anymore. We're going to put the onus on the automakers themselves. When they come to market, we're going to have a quota and say 10%, 12%, 14% of what you sell here must be electrified. So the cost of electrification goes on the automakers. And look for cities at the local level to put in place quotas or other indirect incentives to get the consumer more and more interested in electrics. It's going to happen in China one way or another. You can bank on that. There will be ups and downs, and we're in a down right now. but look for recovery. In particular, it'll be driven on the high end by demand for Teslas, Neos. Mercedes is bringing, Volkswagen's bringing a whole flurry of new products to market. So we're in a lull, but don't count the EV industry in China out yet. No, don't do it.
We were talking about COVID and its impact on the industry. And we also talked a little about TikTok. Of course, when China was shut down, we heard a lot about dealers using TikTok and other social media videos, but mostly TikTok, to reach consumers, do virtual test drives, a lot of these kinds of things. And of course, it's like, what do they call it? A mega app, because you can do transactions and all that. You can make payments. So is that part sticking, or has shopping reverted to normal now that the spread is limited enough, people aren't wearing masks? Are they just back to shopping in person again?
The dealers on the ground in China tell me they're at about 70 to 80% normal traffic. So it's come back a lot. At the same time, China is arguably the most digital economy in the world. People are super, super comfortable with using their phone, their WeChat, to do all kinds of things. And that's definitely the trend. If you look at the tech powers like Alibaba and Tencent, we're seeing more and more movement toward buying your car online, contactless purchase, contactless delivery. In the case of Geely, they even still have your keys being delivered by drone to your doorstep. Okay.
Nice touch.
Nice touch.
Can you talk about the charging infrastructure a little bit in China?
That's a great question, because it's one of the best kept secrets in the world. China dwarfs the rest of the world in terms of its charging infrastructure, both conventional charging and supercharging. And Tesla's a really good example of that. By the end of this year, Tesla will have 6,000 supercharger points north, south, east, and west in China. Huge number. And many of these are situated not between cities, but even within cities, to make it more convenient than ever for owners of Teslas to charge their cars quickly. So there's no shortage of supply or capability when it comes to charging infrastructure in China. They're the global leader already. The key, as John alluded to earlier, is to get more and more customers feeling confident and feeling happy about buying EVs. That's the thing to watch.
Mike, what do you think is going to happen with the Chinese auto industry overall from this standpoint? There's way too many car companies, well over 100. I just saw some interesting stats. The top 10 car companies control 60% of the market. The top 30 brands account for 90% of sales. And you've got well over 70 other companies then fighting for scraps. In the EV segment, there's roughly 50 startups. What I just read recently was that all but 5 of them have seen their funding dry up. And we've been waiting for a shakeout in the Chinese industry for years now. It hasn't happened. Is it going to happen at all, or are states and municipalities just going to keep feeding these things forever?
They'll keep feeding them, John, for as long as they possibly can, because it means jobs and potential for tax revenues, potential for more investment coming in. It's just the way China works. And if you saw consolidation overnight tomorrow, you'd say, well, this isn't China anymore. China's morphed into something else. The power at the local levels is that strong. Now, they are concerned because the local market, domestic market, is not strong anymore. So what are they going to do with all that capacity? Definitely the direction is to export or to produce overseas. So you've seen in recent months, Great Wall, Geely, SAIC moving into Southeast Asia, moving into India. MG's sales in UK are at record levels. So look for China to sort of take the pressure off of all that overcapacity by, for the first time, actively pushing out into global markets, not necessarily US or Europe, but Southeast Asia, Africa, Middle East.
As part of the 2025 ambitions, we talked about electric and digital technology, other technologies, but automated driving as well. The Chinese are really pushing and have not let up at all during this recession, this global economic contraction. They're just pushing full along. What is the market there like for ride sharing, and what is that tech culture like that's leaning into these AVs? How do they see them being used? Is it more truck based, like we're seeing more talk here, or is it really about everybody in these giant mega cities, shuttling around on robo-taxis?
But both, and Didi's the biggest ride-hailing company in the world by far, and they're actively investing in next generation autonomous ADAS, call it what you will, level 3, level 4. They're going for it. They don't want drivers in their cars in the future. But I think China's biggest advantage is on the regulatory front. So if you look at the world, you say, well, the Germans have been very active in adopting ADAS and going for autonomous technologies in their luxury cars. California is arguably, I would say, far and away the leader in autonomous technology. You got Waymos and Teslas and the rest here, NVIDIA's. And then you look at China, you say, well, what's their big advantage? The market, plus a government that is hell-bent on making China the leader in next generation tech, including autonomous. And they understand that the key to that is regulation, infrastructure regulation, converting highways to all autonomous, building cities that will be autonomous. This is where China enjoys an edge. And there are a handful of very good Chinese autonomous tech companies already, Baidu being one. You look at WeRide, you look at Pony, Too Simple, which has operations both here in China. They're the real deal. And with the support of the government, China has a real opportunity to be a global leader in autonomous.
I'm wondering, part of the discussion about the future of transportation in this country is often on the younger people maybe aren't as interested in driving. And I'm not sure how COVID plays into that. But a lot of anecdotal discussion about my nephew or whatever not taking a long time to get his license. I'm curious, what's that like in China? Is there anything comparable? Do people in general, everybody have an ambition of driving if they don't now, or what's that look like?
Think of China sort of a tale of two cities. You've got the wealthy coastal cities like Shanghai, Beijing, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, with very good mass transportation systems and very convenient DD services all over the place. So many of my friends in China now say, owning a car is a lot of hassle. We have to worry about parking, taxes. If we get in an accident, there's insurance. Let's just go DD and minimize. Then you have the second layer of customers in the second, third, and fourth tier cities inland, who have those aspirations. Oh, I can't wait to get my first car. I've been saving for this moment. This will be great for my family, for generations. We'll be so proud of us. So both of those are happening at the same time. And as a result, we see China's market sort of not doing as gangbusters as it used to. So coastal cities going to alternatives, and inland cities, still hungry for cars, but their incomes aren't growing as quickly as they used to. So that's why we see a sort of flattening demand. And I expect over the next 5 years not to see some big recovery in the China market, a new takeoff, but rather sort of a plateauing and a hanging around the volumes where we are today.
Is there a generational? I'm sorry, Jeff.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just wondering if there was is there a generational divide too, or is it just the regional division?
Yes, younger people definitely getting more interested in experiences and their phones, and less so about the car because their parents already got one, so they don't make that breakthrough. It's really new territory. We just have to keep an eye on where things can go. They can go in any direction.
Mike, we got a couple of minutes here, but earlier in the show, we talked about how U.S. companies are revamping their supply chains. But I was very interested to see Korean companies in China doing the very same thing. How are other countries, specifically the European Union, Japan, and South Korea, looking at China these days? We know what the American situation is. What are those countries doing?
China has a level of tension with its neighbors we haven't seen in the last 40 years. It's not just the U.S. There was a border clash with India recently, and the Indians responded by shutting down a lot of Chinese apps. There's Chinese ships passing by Japanese islands called the Senkakus on a daily basis, swarming the place with ships. With regards to Hong Kong, you guys know the story, national security law. Australia, they banned imports of barley and wine. it seems like there's just tension on every front. And in Japan's case, they even have put in place billions of dollars of incentives to have Japanese companies reshore, leave China and come back to Japan. Korea, same story. Everyone, it is really a pivotal moment in history. Everyone's taking a fresh look at China and saying, do we need to rethink things? We better rethink things, because China isn't exactly what we thought it was. Let's diversify our risk. Let's move to new places.
And real quick, we're down to the last minute. Does this bother China, or is this time China saying, nope, we're standing up on the stage here?
It seems like, John, China is saying this is our moment in history to step our game up. We have been working toward this goal of being respected as a global power for so long, and we have an economic might. We have a military might we have never had before. Let's flex our muscles and see how the world responds.
Well, it's going to be fascinating to watch how the world responds and how China responds to that as well. But Michael Dunne from ZoZo Go, thanks so much for coming on and talking all about China and the automotive industry there.
Always enjoy joining you, John. Thanks very much for having me.
And Eric, great to have you on. And Jamie, same. Thank you for being on the show today.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot, John.
Autoline This Week partnered with the Consulate General of Canada in Detroit to produce this episode.